Good evening, everyone. It is an immense honor for me to be here tonight, albeit remotely, and to have the opportunity to address the architecture and academic community of the University of Illinois School of Architecture. The lineup for the lecture series this semester is truly remarkable. So not only do I feel in amazing company, but I do recommend that you stick around. I want to take a moment to also thank the director, Francisco, for this amazing invitation. I recognize that in this day and age, having a space like this one in the media to express oneself is not only a privilege, but also a great responsibility. The theme for the lecture series is, as you know, political space, which couldn't have been better timed. Everything that we do is political, especially when what we do concerns the built environment. The capacity or inability to build is oftentimes a signature of power, or of its absence, for that matter. So tonight, I won't be telling you much about my design work and project collaborations. This is all very well documented on my website and elsewhere. I would like to take this opportunity instead to tell you about a design framework or the operational structure that I have come to develop over the years and out of necessity. A set of conceptual principles. So I ask that you bear with me tonight. Put very simply, the conception of this thing that I call the design framework comes from a questioning and a critique of the digital, broadly speaking. Being a fervent advocate of digital experimentation and computational advances myself in architecture, and as an inevitable product of the post-digital era, I was drawn to consider a multiplicity of architectural and fabrication anxieties around this concept of the digital. I like to think of these considerations as a friendly critique from the inside. I have come to admire, as you see here in this slide, the work of many people, and some of them shown, especially work that is based in computational thinking. These are some of my idols, if you will, and we have a broad range from 3D printing to parametric brick and robotic arm placement of carbon fibers and resin. Most of these are very successful research pavilions or advancements in construction technologies. However, I began to ask myself, who builds these things? And for whom are they being built? Are they multiple or built only once? How much are they really worth? Are they all the same? Or can they be customized by each end user? If needed, could any of these be made enough, in enough quantity to supply the high demand of today's economy? A demand like that of affordable housing, for example. It is understandable then that my formative projects have all been concerned with the conception, description, and fabrication of complex form, of unconstrained form. And how that form could be more freely inhabited. This speculative mountain cabin shown here is made up of nested volumes that could be woven in 3D space. Objectively speaking, we can make almost anything. We can measure almost any extreme or microscopic quantity in real time and predict the performance of any building or machine with an incredible degree of precision. We have such a rich catalog of built and speculative architectural work, styles, schools of thought, that the world should be resolved by now, shouldn't it? But it is not. What then is stopping us? This collage that I'm showing you here is inviting us to think of our sunken pavilions the way we may think of our monuments, forgotten in time and meaningless if the algorithms are not revealed. So what I'm trying to point at is that clearly there are greater forces that we need to account for, and of course, that we need to challenge in order to make way for better models of practice. The inquiry to me became about pinpointing these forces and trying to answer these questions. What are the problems that we are really trying to solve? What tools are available for us to use? And what are the collateral effects of our amazing design solutions and our amazing production technologies? This image is a projection of a blighted portion of Detroit, Michigan, once an American cradle of manufacture, automation, and production. In my imagination, it would be possible to repurpose the idle robotic arms living in decaying automotive factories to actually try to rebuild this city. Put in the brilliant words of Professor Mi-Jin Yoon, former department head at MIT, I think that we are waking up to an expanded awareness, a recognition that problems have context, that one's solutions can be another's problems, and the solution can be a problem in and of itself. And this is a real challenge for architecture. As we try to catch up with fabrication technologies, as we try to minimize construction costs, and as we try to design highly customizable environments. Body, motion, perception, feedback, collaboration, synchronization, memory. The act of making must inhabit the senses before, during, and after. In her brilliant discussion of work and labor, Hannah Arendt tells us that, quote, the moment a tool begins to guide the body's labor, taking over its rhythm, it becomes, by definition, a machine. And it is served by the laborer, not the other way around, end quote. But what happens when there is no rhythm anymore, no thought, and the hand is reduced to a lever that can press start, pause, and stop to run someone else's algorithm? Our continuous introduction of technologies, new apps, new tools to model spaces and buildings. How much is it about opening new doors? And how much is it about making doors obsolete? Ourselves, our builders, our clients even. How do we arrive at better solutions that do not add or maximize value through computation, but rather that can redistribute that attain value to society? Like Thomas Sergio put it, obsolescence is the very hallmark of progress. So the search for that redistribution of value took me to Detroit as part of a travel research grant. In this case, and in my opinion, many of the current elements of this city can be traced back in greater or lesser measure to questions of labor and production, like inequality, food scarcity, decentralization of production, polarization of labor, and even urban blight. Here we can observe one of many assembly plants built for a specific purpose and then abandoned when the demand subsided or when the technology just became obsolete. There just was nothing precious or human about this building to keep it in motion. But in contrast, and also in Detroit, this piece of collaborative artwork, the illuminated mural in East Grand Boulevard by Katie Craig, speaks loudly about creativity, about engagement, and about generative making. Those things that us designers treasure so much. The rules are known, but the result is not. This action reclaims a piece of the city. This other example by the Heidelberg Project reclaims dispossessed objects and inserts new meaning into these empty vessels. True, each one of us may read something different in these symbols, but there is a clear invitation to read. The Georgia Street Farm, on the other hand, is one of many initiatives that reclaims urban territory to fight food scarcity by teaching people to understand the production cycles of food. Everyone here has stakes and is an actor in some measure. In summary, I believe that the only way to have an inclusive and socially relevant space of production that is greater than the things that it produces is to insert the slippery and elusive notion of culture. Production has to become a cultural enterprise, or else the mechanization and automation of processes solely motivated by maximization of efficiency and profit can never lead to a social and intellectual advancement. This that I'm showing, my speculative design proposal, claimed a massive automobile assembly in the heart of Detroit that was soon to be abandoned and ruined like so many others, and repurposed it to create a different kind of production mode. But for making what? This colossal infrastructure is subdivided, hacked, reorganized, and designed a life-sustaining purpose instead, to produce food, the most basic and primary of products, for the sake of argument. It wasn't enough for this assembly to be repurposed to make trendy electric cars or airplanes or even housing. What I am proposing is a closed ecosystem in which the maker is also the consumer. This food assembly, as I call it, becomes a food fortress, a place for people to learn, to experiment, to understand, to play, to engage with the public realm, to create, and of course, to work within one's own abilities. In this dystopia, robotic arms and conveyor belts serve precisely to seed, to germinate, and transport a wide variety of foods. Humans can breed, rearrange, harvest, and the creation of public space within this fortress is prioritized over the mission of obtaining the highest yield of crops. In this place where cars used to be assembled to be shipped all over the world, now the algorithms track and sort a profuse amount of data. They calculate, they optimize for each variable, and allow dozens of vegetables and their varieties to be produced, shipped, but consumed locally. The value that was created here will stay here. And that is the big takeaway of this project. Switching scenarios a little bit, I had the great opportunity to collaborate with Rafi Siegel and many others in the design of a housing prototype for the city of Kigali in Rwanda to address the growing population and the ongoing threat of floods and landslides for informal construction. We were also tasked with building this house. But what you're seeing here is the King's Palace in Nyanza, a striking, traditionally hand-woven, thatched structure, shaped like a beehive with multiple compartments. It was a true marvel to experience this place. Our proposal, on the other hand, was much less striking than the King's Palace, to be honest. It was a little bit more orthogonal. We employed Swiss reinforced brick technology, and for the production of the bricks, the clay was extracted locally, and the bricks are extruded and baked by local franchises. But that doesn't seem very innovative. What was really striking to me, coming from this technocratic mindset about construction, was that a lot of the material that was used was already close to the site. That the stones that were used for the foundation slab were picked up one at a time, thrown at the ground a couple of times. And then the stones would split in fragments that fit perfectly together, creating an almost flat but rugged surface for the concrete slab to adhere to. And everything with the help of little more than a hand sketch. All of this process that we experienced through building this house was so strangely collective and also social. Children would come up to the site and hang out after school and observe and play. Many would bring water up the hill in those yellow containers that you're seeing, one container at a time. So aside from the fact that today a family lives in this house, there is a breathtaking realization that this architecture truly belongs here. Local masons were trained on site by the brick company, and a cohort of architecture and planning students were able to experience practice from the inside out. No prefabricated or 3D printed house can easily claim the same thing, at least not yet. This rather simple way of making, all of a sudden, becomes so smart, so righteous, if I might say. And no robots were required. Needless to say, this was a very formative project for me. And not only because we managed to solve that corner detail. So as you all know, a massive hurricane made landfall in Puerto Rico in 2017. When we were, as a country, perhaps the least prepared. The damage and the loss of life is impossible to describe with figures, not even today. The only way I can describe the energy that was felt back then is as a great sense of urgency and a very personal will to help. And that sense of urgency is something that sometimes we don't easily find in design. More than ever, there was a desire to challenge a practice of architecture that seemed so removed and so abstract from what was actually happening in the world, unless, of course, it could be leveraged in time to avoid greater displacement and greater suffering. So this video can give you an idea of what we were up against. This is a house in the northern part of Puerto Rico. In one day, the 160-mile-per-hour winds of Hurricane Maria left hundreds of thousands of families without the most basic building component, a roof. For many, though, at least the supporting walls remained undamaged. The despair, the confusion, and destruction, thankfully, led to many disaster response efforts. One of those efforts was undertaken by my colleagues, Lisa Sayas and Maria Silen, and myself, supported by MIT. We understood then that we needed to focus on that staggering need for shelter. We set out to basically invent our way into this catastrophe and harness every possible resource into what became a 2-year reconstruction project that we named Petros, that was able to complete 8 roofs. The first instance took place in the southern mountainous region of Puerto Rico, while there was still a power outage through the island. The second instance took place here, the print that you're looking at, one of the most underserved neighborhoods of San Juan. You can see those infamous blue tarps that flooded the media. These things were designed to last about 3 months after installation. This photo was taken 1.5 years after Maria. 1.5 years later. And there is still a lot to do today. So the first question that we had to ask ourselves was, what do we build? We could use perhaps any material, any construction technique, but in order to use the existing supply chain and the labor and the skill, the answer was to use a familiar kind of architecture, but of course, taking it up a notch or two. Here you can see another of the houses that we've worked on. You can notice the difference in dimensions from the previous one, the difference in arrangement. This family had been living under a moldy ceiling for months. We met these 3 ladies in 2018 while working in the South. You can see Joanna, Maria, and Leona. And I think these images speak for themselves. In terms of the actual assembly, we took a traditional method of building, as I just said. We studied it and improved it. We learned on site from local carpenters, contractors, and ran our design by engineers and designers. We inserted ourselves completely, and I mean it, completely, in these projects and in these neighborhoods, from the planning phases until the end. Speaking one-on-one with every family, with every community leader, and with every material supplier. We, of course, had different backgrounds, different degrees of skill and experience, but everyone involved here understood that there was a greater mission behind all of this. Fabricating, in this case, was all about people. The second question, and still a very relevant one to me, was, is there room for design in disaster response? How can we push for better quality and real architectural discourse, especially when the resources are most scarce and so much is at stake? How can we design so smartly that nothing can be value engineered? Here are some of the interior details of the structures. And I think there is a true beauty in the simplicity of this proposal. The repetition, the details, the material. But still, I know, and we all know, that there is a lot more we can do, and that I hope that we are able to do. The third question is, how do we transcend our immediate intervention in order to actually shift things around? How do we tackle the greater problem? If the intention was to make a statement out of a handful of roofs in an island, this effort had to find other outlets. And so I turned my focus on education, documentation, and dissemination. The material clarity, if you will, the repeatability of the components, led, of course, to an obvious outlet. We created Techo's design guidelines, both in digital and in print, that was produced and then edited by our collaborators and distributed to all of our stakeholders, so that if anyone wanted to produce what we have done, they could do so independently of us. So this guide describes the processes step by step, applying all the knowledge that we gained from the design process and the input that we were fortunate enough to obtain from engineers and builders that donated their time to this cause. So once more, the privilege of acquiring this knowledge also came with the responsibility to share it. So this was a very thoughtful project in that sense. But coupled with this design guidelines, I was also able to create a material calculator, an algorithm that could show families in real time and for their specific home dimensions, not only what the renovation would look like in the end, but also show them the material quantities that were needed to rebuild their specific roof. Then this information can be easily connected to real material costs, which can be based on our 2-year experience. This script was built to count and illustrate every component, down to the pressure washer and every screw. And the idea behind it was that families were having a hard time obtaining reliable estimates, in addition to reliable designs. So this was a way to leverage computation to streamline this process. Since we knew then, and we still know today, that so much still needs to be done, and that our solution needs to be adaptable and as repeatable as possible. I'm going to show you that is the shopping list of materials. And that is the end result. So this photo here, to me, is the embodiment of production as a cultural enterprise. But as much as I think of this project as a success, the truth is that the problem is even larger than I thought it was when we first embarked in the construction. Not only are there still families waiting for hurricane-resistant roofs today, but now we also have families being displaced because of the recent earthquakes hitting the southern portion of Puerto Rico. The reality is that we have a systematic crisis of materials and means that needs to be addressed in a more holistic way. We are now talking about wooden roofs and concrete roofs, mountain homes and coastal homes, masonry, plywood, everything, you name it. Everything needs to be looked at and understood. And this mindset that I'm sharing with you today has brought together a group of like-minded and action-oriented professionals and liaisons from different disciplines across the board that I have had the great pleasure to work with over the past year. We have formed a sort of organic coalition to leverage everyone's design and construction knowledge to create even more than solutions, to come up with pathways, with real pathways, not only for rebuilding, but also for helping individuals and local governments on how to secure funding to build disaster-resistant homes and structures. The end goal is to empower, to enfranchise, and again, to redistribute the value so that the solution can last for decades. One of the projects that I am currently working on through this collaboration is a proposal for a community center / sports venue that can act as a hurricane or earthquake shelter if needed. The structure would need to expand and contract depending on the stage of use, pre, during, or post-disaster, the catchment area, the population, and the space available. This municipality that I'm currently showing here is evaluating the construction of 3 possible new shelters. So you may be asking yourselves at this point, what does computational design and fabrication have to do with this particular project? Well, we could model the influx of people for each of the natural events based on historical data to prepare each shelter by region. We could efficiently accommodate families of different sizes inside a single shelter in real time for limited spaces, while also observing COVID protocols for pre, during, and post-disaster settings. It would help us increase the material efficiency during construction and implement even generative art projects to reclaim certain urban portions of the South. Or it may simply not help us at all. And that is also okay. The solution, if I may say, is still a work in progress, but at least the design framework is already in place. Thank you.